Yeah, Mary and Preston, I just got a copy of the police report here from the jail. The main takeaways in it: police call the suspect a tremendous danger to the public. They also say that he resisted officers when he was taken into custody and then didn't make any statements to investigators. I've been digging into his criminal history. In that, I found concerns from a psychologist who said that the suspect was a high risk for committing future crimes. Jahmed Haynes is accused of the shocking murder of 80-year-old Ruth Dalton. Police say it was a random carjacking where Haynes is accused of running Ruth over, then stabbing her dog Prince to death. Today, there was a quick hearing where a judge said there was enough evidence to hold Haynes in jail. But now we're learning about his criminal history, which started 3 decades ago. In the 90s, Haynes was convicted of multiple crimes, including vehicular homicide. He served less than 2 years in prison, but was back in custody not long after. In 99, he was convicted of robbery, and in 2003, assault. We learned that assault was on a prison officer here at the Monroe Correctional Facility. He allegedly stabbed the guard with a 12-inch shank. That case prompted a judge to send Haynes to the Western State Hospital for mental health treatment. There, a psychologist's report noted that Haynes had signs of psychosis and paranoia, and, quote, if he discontinues his medication, which he says he will most likely decompensate in a rather short period of time. The report went on to say Haynes is, quote, high risk for committing future criminal acts jeopardizing public safety. Haynes was sent back to prison where he stayed until 2017. He was released, complied with the terms of his supervision until that expired in 2018. Court records show Haynes hasn't had any new criminal cases in Seattle until he was arrested for Ruth Dalton's murder this week. The case has rightly outraged many in the city and has become a flashpoint in the region's fight to control crime, with both candidates for Washington governor weighing in on X. Dave Reichert saying, quote, years of unchecked lawlessness and tying the hands of our officers has gotten us to this point. And Bob Ferguson, who is currently the Attorney General, thanking Seattle police and saying the person responsible needs to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Now, the police report revealed also officers said they observed cuts on the suspect's hands when he was taken into custody. The next step for this case is going to be tomorrow. There's going to be another hearing here at the jail. They're going to talk about what bail the judge may set in this case, and I'm told that Ruth Dalton's family does plan to attend that hearing. Prosecutors say they have until Monday to decide on filing charges. For now, reporting live in Seattle, Jeremy Harris, KOMO News.
This man, Jahmed Haynes, is in jail on suspicion of murder and animal cruelty. He's accused of carjacking and killing an 80-year-old woman in Seattle. Tonight, I talk with Jeremy Harris about how police connected Haynes to the death of Ruth Dalton.
Well, Jeremy, thanks for being with us here on ARC Seattle tonight. So let's talk about this horrific case once again. I mean, we've got an 8-time convicted felon here now under arrest, accused of killing this 80-year-old dog walker. Why don't you walk us through how this guy came to be the one that they ended up arresting?
Yeah, we got a lot of new information today, Preston, about this. I just got a copy of the arrest report here at the King County Jail. So basically what we know is that this carjacking happens on Tuesday morning. Ruth Dalton, she's 80 years old. She's driving down the street. Police say that this guy, Jahmed Haynes, jumped into her car. They don't know exactly what the interaction was like between the two of them, but at some point, Ruth gets either pushed out the door or falls out and is run over by her own car. So we've now learned that Seattle police, when they recovered that car, they also found her cell phone and her dead dog who had been stabbed in a trash can down at the Brighton Playfields. The crime scene investigators started matching fingerprints on the phones, on the trash can. They were able to match that to Jahmed Haynes, who has a prior criminal record, so his fingerprints are definitely in the system. And as they're doing that, they're starting to get surveillance on him. They determined that he was actually at a mental health appointment, and they had the SWAT team take him down when he came out on Wednesday. So now he's been booked into jail. We learned today that he had some cuts on his hand and that he did not say anything to investigators when he was taken into custody.
You know, that was one of those things I was curious about. Did he say anything when he was taken into custody? That was last night before we had this new report and the new information that you're bringing forth now. I do want to talk a little bit about his criminal history because we know he's an 8-time convicted felon. This guy's just living in an apartment complex or wherever that is, just out there. No big deal. Eight-time convicted felon, and here he is doing this. A lot of people think he should never have been out in the first place after these kinds of convictions. But what does that criminal history look like?
Well, and Preston, this was the number one question that I got on this story as we've been reporting on it, is people wanted to know, What did this guy do, and why was he out of prison? And we got a lot of answers to those questions today. I dug through a lot of court records in Kings, Snohomish, and Pierce County. So we track his criminal history back to 1991. He was arrested for a stolen car. In 93, he was arrested for vehicular homicide. He was later convicted on that. He was put in prison, but he only was there for about a year. Then he was released. Then he had some violations. He goes back to prison until 99. In 99, he gets out of prison, but he's quickly rearrested in Renton for a robbery. He gets put back in prison. He's there for several years. Then in 2003, he attacked a prison guard out at the Monroe Penitentiary. He stabbed this prison guard with a 12-inch shank. And actually, the guard ran away from him and he chased him down through the jail cell. So he gets convicted on an assault charge. What was really interesting about this prison attack is that during the criminal proceedings, a judge said, I want to send you to Western State Hospital down in Pierce County because I want you to receive some mental health treatment. And there was some concern about his competency to stand trial. So he goes on mental health treatment and he gets under the care of a psychiatrist. He's given medication. He apparently responded very well to that, though he said he didn't want to be on the meds and he didn't like being on the meds in prison. So he's ultimately released from Western State Hospital and sent back to prison. But there was some concern when he was at Western State Hospital. There was concern there about his risk for reoffending. And in a report from a psychologist that I read today, said that he was at moderate risk for serious violent offenses that include murder, and that he was at a high risk for committing new crimes that jeopardize public safety. So that was 2005 when that report was written. He stayed in prison until 2017. He was released. He completed his supervised release. And as far as I can tell, this guy has had no new offenses in about the last 6 or 7 years since he was released from prison.
So, the question is at that point, what can you even do if he's served the time they told him to serve, and he's gone through all of these things? I mean, clearly he's not rehabilitated. We saw that, and he's obviously reoffended now, what he's accused of doing here. But I mean, at this point in time, it sounds like he'll never get out of prison if he's convicted of what he's accused of doing.
Well, certainly, and this would also fall into the 3-strike rule here in Washington. This would be a third violent offense, so he could potentially face life in prison. But what we can tell you, the next question that's going to happen here, Preston, is whether or not he's found competent to stand trial and how much of an issue that's going to play here in his case. I'd have to imagine the defense is going to look into that and say he was already at one point found incompetent. He was already at Western State Hospital. Maybe that's going to play a factor in this case moving forward. We've seen that. You'll remember when Ina Kwan, she was a business owner in downtown Seattle. She was executed at a traffic light last year. The suspect who was charged in her murder, Cordell Gooseby, he at this point has still not been found competent to stand trial. And that's almost, we're going on a year and a half in that case, and they're still debating his competency. So I would suspect that may happen here, but we'll see. There's still a lot to go through before we get to that point.
Well, and I can easily remember the situation in downtown Seattle when that nurse was pushed down the escalator down near the transit area. And that person was another convicted felon who taxpayers ended up paying for because there was no space in Western State Hospital. And so we just kept getting paid to sit there and wait because there was no space. So I'm curious if that's what we're going to be looking at again. It's quite insane, really.
Well, we'll see. That's something we're going to be watching for very closely. The next steps in the case here, though, Preston, is going to be tomorrow. There's another hearing to address bail. Generally, the defense attorneys are going to ask for a bail reduction. I don't know that will happen. I think it will. And then the prosecutors will essentially list and say, here's why we don't want this guy given any shot at getting bail. He's a violent 8-time felon. He's accused of first-degree murder and animal cruelty. He's an imminent threat to public safety. So that may play out in court tomorrow. I'm told the victim's family does expect to be there, and the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office telling us today they have until Monday to file the criminal charges, and so we could expect some developments on that next week.
It surprises me that a person like this, convicted so many times in and out of prison and mental institutions, that they're not placed on some kind of lifetime supervision, knowing that there is at least some kind of risk that this person is going to reoffend. So I wonder if they'll, start to look at any of this kind of stuff, especially with state lawmakers in different places here within Washington State, because you can only imagine if this guy's out there and this is the case here, there are probably countless other people with very similar situations that are just running around thinking everything's okay, and the next thing you know, they commit a very dangerous crime.
Well, it's a great question, Preston, and it's one that we still have too. We know that he was arrested shortly after going to a mental health clinic in Capitol Hill. So I'm not sure if he was under the care. I don't see anything that would indicate that that was court ordered or that that was a state requirement. But that's something that we've been trying to look into is, was he under any sort of court mandated supervision? As far as I can tell, he wasn't. But we know that he was seeing a mental health counselor. He was arrested after going to that mental health clinic. But you're right. This is a huge issue. We have a lot of people who are dealing with mental health and substance abuse. And in his court history, he has history of doing drugs. And so perhaps that's going to play a factor in this. Certainly a question we have is there any evidence that he was under the influence of drugs? Did they find any drugs in his apartment or anything like that? But you're exactly right. This is an urgent issue, especially here in the state of Washington, is caring for people with mental health and who also have violent tendencies. But also, and I've seen these concerns about crime, and I think they're completely legitimate. This is the third 80-plus-year-old woman to be carjacked in Seattle in the last year and a half. That's just from what I've covered. We had the other one that was in the Central District where a woman was ripped out of her car while she was parking. And then there was another case where a juvenile carjacked an 83-year-old woman, and then he didn't even go to juvenile detention. He was released to his parents from the hospital. And so it is understandable, and I get the frustration. But again, in this case, it sounds like this guy, he was in prison for the better part of 30 years. He completed his time, and he was sort of off the grid for the last several years. And now he's accused of a horrific, awful murder of an 80-year-old woman.
Well, in my opinion, guys like this, after serving that kind of time and having those kind of notes from psychiatrists at mental health institutions, they should never have an opportunity to be off the grid, because they do have a chance of reoffending. And we see what happens when those people slip away and they aren't monitored. We've got a real sad and horrific situation on our hands now. Jeremy, thanks for the update. A lot of great new information. I know our viewers will appreciate that. Keep us posted as things continue to develop. And as always, thanks for being with us here on ARC Seattle tonight. We appreciate it.
You bet, Preston. Thank you.